YouTube, what it do? Dinero Talk 23. I'm back with another video. But YouTube, before we get into this video, I need y'all help with something. I need y'all to help me get to 1,000 subscribers. Come on, YouTube, it's free. All you gotta do is click the subscribe button. Share the video, please. When you're done with the video, like, comment, and subscribe for me. But today, we got the serial killer who became a YouTuber. Let's see how that's possible. Let's get into it.
The world is a cruel, crime-filled place. To try to combat this, there are several laws put in place in an attempt to keep order and justice. For Pedro Rodriguez, who has been dubbed the Brazilian Dexter, the punishment for some were not severe enough. After being caught for several murders, including that of his own father, Pedro went on to commit the majority of his killings within jail, brutally taking the lives of those he believed to deserve the ultimate sentence. But what makes a man who can kill his own father turn into a vigilante who targets the worst of society? Was this his own sick way of validating murder? Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name's James, and today we're looking into the case of Pedro Rodriguez Fio, the only serial killer you don't have to be scared of. Unless you end up doing something really, really bad.
When you plan and schedule your social media with Later, you can focus on your business.
From the day he was born, Pedro grew up in a violent home. He was born in the state of Minas Gerais, Brazil, on June 17, 1954. And often found himself on the receiving end of his father's cruelty. In fact, Pedro got his first beating while still in his mother's womb, after he abused her while pregnant. This resulted in Pedro being born with a deformed and damaged skull. Growing up in this toxic and violent environment made Pedro come to believe that being evil was fun, which eventually came to a boiling point when he was just 13. After an argument with his cousin, the teen pushed the older man into a sugarcane press, almost killing him. A year later, Pedro's father was working as a school guard. One day his father returned home, claiming that the deputy mayor of Alphenus had accused him of stealing food from the canteen. I think this means that he may have eaten a burger or two without paying, opposed to being caught with sloppy joes stuffed in his pockets. Pedro didn't like the idea of his father wrongfully losing his job and decided to do something about it. Taking a gun, Pedro shot the deputy mayor in cold blood, and then shot another school guard he believed was the real food thief. When the doctor says eating too much junk food can kill you, I don't think he meant it this way. After the murders, the young teen fled to Mogi Das Cruzes, where he raided drug dens and killed sex traffickers. While cleaning up the streets in his own messed up way, he met a young woman named Maria Olympia, who he soon fell in love with and got engaged to. Not long after that, she would fall pregnant. Now, this could be the perfect ending, right? The killer who tried to make amends for killing a deputy mayor and guard by picking off drug dealers and human traffickers settled down with a wife and baby? Well, unfortunately, we don't do happily ever after endings here on Twisted Minds, and things are about to get much worse. Although Pedro had fallen in love, things weren't peaches and cream. In fact, Maria, who was part of a gang, would ask Pedro to track down and kill enemy gang members. The things we do for love, right? After the targets were hit, the streak of violence against drug gangs slowed down, but they had not forgotten about what the couple had done. One of the drug dealers eventually put a hit out on Maria, killing both her and the unborn baby. This forced an 18-year-old Pedro into hiding again, heartbroken, alone, and seeking revenge. Pedro began torturing drug dealers and gangsters for information, like some sort of cliché movie. He eventually found out the gang leader was responsible and launched a daring attack on a wedding party. If the bride was hoping for a white wedding, she was out of luck. Once Pedro and his gang were done, 7 of the gang members were dead, with a further 16 wounded. Surprisingly, the police at the time did not really make any efforts to catch him, as they saw him as a vigilante cleaning up the streets. These are the poverty-ridden streets of Brazil we're talking about here.
And they wasn't looking for him. You know,
In most cases, Pedro targeted all kinds of criminals, finding them by looking up their names and addresses before brutally killing them in a variety of ways. Although he would try any method at least once, his favorite way of murdering people was stabbing them to death or hacking them apart with blades. When confronting robber João da Costa, he crushed his skull with a blunt weapon, whereas one of his unnamed fellow inmates was decapitated with a knife. In an interview, he stated that if he heard of a crime, he would be spurred on to find and kill the person responsible. Sometimes he would capture criminals and torture them to death whenever he needed to get out some anger, rather than clean up the streets. Months after the wedding massacre, Pedro discovered that his favorite cousin's boyfriend had got her pregnant but refused to marry her. This didn't go down well with the serial killer, vigilante, who didn't hesitate in shooting the man out of anger. As Pedro was going around killing drug gangs, he didn't realize that things at home had gotten even worse. One night, in a drunken rage, his father brutally killed his mother with a machete. As soon as Pedro heard the gruesome news, he did what he did best at. In May 1973, he headed to the jail where his father was being kept, waited till visiting hours, and stabbed him 22 times, right in front of the shocked guards and other prisoners. To make things even more gruesome, he cut out his father's heart and took a bite out of it like it was a jam-filled donut. This obviously led to his arrest, and according to news sources, he even managed to kill another prisoner while being transported to another facility after finding out the man was incarcerated for taking advantage of young girls.
Wait.
Bro,
are you a Christian content creator who is looking to learn how to build, launch...
This guy's wild, bro.
Pedro, who was found guilty and sentenced to 126 years, was sent to one of the most brutal prisons in Brazil, where he immediately proved himself to be among the most ruthless of killers. Within the constraints of the prison, he appointed himself the judge, jury, and executioner of the most evil criminals being held at the prison. He would often torture his victims with whatever weapon he could fashion, often forced to get inventive with his ways of torturing them. His favorite targets were pedophiles and drug dealers. Word got out around the prison that Pedro was a killer who liked to kill other criminals, which caused many of the prisoners, who you have to remember were some of the toughest and worst men around, to be absolutely terrified of him. When a prison gang tried to take him out, it was reported that out of the 5 men who attacked him on the yard, only 2 managed to run away with their lives. After that, no one tried to take him out again. For the crimes committed behind bars, he was sentenced to an increased 400 years, but due to some legal loopholes, Pedro was set for a 2003 release date. Police did manage to stick an extra 4 years on him for bad behavior, but in 2007, Pedro was finally freed, despite killing 47 people while behind bars. You may be asking yourself, how can he be freed after killing so many people? Well, Brazil has a law that means a criminal cannot spend more than 40 years in prison. Yep, you heard that right. The only time a life sentence can be carried out is for military crimes committed during wartime. Pedro has since become something of a phenomenon for his survival in the harshest regime of a Brazilian prison, as on average, a prisoner will live up to 15 years in prison before being killed by disease or other prisoners. Although this may sound awful, this environment is still rife throughout Brazilian prisons, especially those holding the worst of the worst. After spending 34 years behind bars, Pedro was freed in 2007 and moved to Fortaleza in the Brazilian state of Ceará. However, his past crimes would soon catch up with him, and he was arrested again in 2011 on new accusations of starting riots and false imprisonment. Police arrested the killer at his new rural home, and he spent a further 8 years in prison. This time around, he kept his killer instinct to himself to prevent spending more time than necessary in a cell. While in prison this time, he sent letters to his new girlfriend, who was also serving time for theft. After his release in 2008, Pedro boasted about killing over 100 people, but stressed that they were all bad people who did bad things. In fact, he even went as far as to say that he had done society a favor by killing the scums. The killer now says he is sorry for his crimes and has since converted to Christianity. He has also written an autobiography where he openly talks about his violent past. Bizarrely, Pedro has since started his own YouTube channel, where he posts clips of interviews and talks about his murderous spree. He has currently amassed a subscriber count of 252,000, with hundreds of people commenting on his videos every day. Can we take a minute to just take that in? One of the worst and notorious serial killers of the 70s now has his own YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. It would be criminal if you didn't. And you know what I like to do to criminals. Behind the YouTube channel is a 30-year-old man called Pablo Silva, who is a YouTuber himself and a longtime friend of the serial killer. He is the one who sets up the video subjects, as well as doing other tasks to help Pedro out. For example, he buys him clothes and takes him to church. When asked why he helped get Pedro on YouTube, Pablo said, "I had this idea of showing the positive side of Pedro, which many people didn't know. I didn't imagine it would get this far." Pedro Rodriguez Fijo has been described as a psychopath and fits most of the criteria according to psychologists, as he displays a lack of remorse and compassion for those he has brutally killed. With that being said, where Pedro differs is his genuine love for his mother, relatives, and girlfriend, which doesn't completely land him in that category. He was analyzed by psychologists in 1982 and was diagnosed as a paranoid and antisocial character with an overwhelming impulse to act out his own version of justice. It's easy to see the beginning for this serial killer, growing up in a violent and abusive environment. From a young age, he was taught that the way to keep control of a situation or gain power was to be the most violent person in the room. It was this power he got addicted to, and instead of gaining power the same way his father did, by abusing women, he killed off people he thought deserved to die, in a warped form of protection. How could he feel bad about what he had done when he was only doing it to protect others, right? Also, it's clear that Pedro often acted out of emotion. When his father was fired for stealing, he lashed out. When the gang members killed his fiancée, he lashed out. And when his father killed his mother, he lashed out. It's clear that Pedro was a product of his upbringing, and that his intent to protect others stemmed from the abuse he saw his mother go through at the hands of his father. In fact, Pedro was reminded of this abuse every single time he looked in the mirror, as his deformed skull could clearly be seen. Something that was a result of a man beating his pregnant wife. Absolutely despicable. A disturbing fact, especially considering that he is now free, is that Pedro Rodriguez lands 6th in the list of serial killers with the most confirmed kills. At 71 proven kills, it means that he would have had to have killed multiple people a year from the time of his first kill in 1968.
I don't know what to say about
Since
him,
leaving
bro.
prison, the 67-year-old serial killer has supposedly changed his ways, reaching out to troubled youths in order to keep them away from a life of crime and violence. To some people, Pedro is a hero, and to others, he is no better than the criminals he kills. Despite which side of the fence you stand at, one thing we can all agree on is that the legacy of Pedro Rodriguez Fijo will live on for many years to come. For those who believe that Pedro solely wanted to make the world a better place by taking out the trash, it is worth knowing that he has a tattoo on his left arm that says, "I kill for pleasure." The question is, can a man with 71 confirmed kills and admitting to over 100 really be a changed man? He wanders the streets like everybody else, but more frighteningly, is amassing a huge amount of followers holding on to every last word. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Pedro Rodriguez Fijo, and why don't you go...
Bro, he killed 100 people. He let them know he killed 100 people and he still got out. There's people in jail that don't get out for drug charges. He killed 100 plus people, 100 people, and he still got out. I don't know. He a YouTuber now, so I don't know. YouTube, I'll catch y'all on the next one.